Yeah, so just in terms of the SEC and the Big Ten, I think it's pretty easy to see that the interesting um, kind of narrative or storyline anytime these conferences get together, and they will when Tennessee and Purdue play, and Kentucky, Iowa, and Penn State and Arkansas, and of course this one that really matters is that they're the two conferences with the most money, that get the best TV ratings, that put the most fans in the seat. Their attendance is the best. They get the most attention on television, and they own the sport in regards to money. So that makes it interesting. And they've got brands that eclipse the other leagues. So
Also,
that's interesting, but it's easy to see if you just look at the results on the field that the SEC has distinguished itself. It wins more against the Big Ten than the Big Ten wins against it. And again, I'm going to hold to my 65-35 ratio. It's pretty close, and the Big Ten produces the second most NFL players. The SEC produces the most, and it's consistent. If you go year to year to year, it's almost exactly consistent. Like I just looked this up the other day. Like the SEC might have had 360 or 70 players in the NFL, and the Big Ten had like 280. And then whoever was third was well down from then. It's just,
ACC was
it's
208.
clear. It's a clear separation all the way through.
The biggest thing is that you have to understand when a lot of people they say SEC bias, and I hear it all the time. Trust me, I hear it all the time. The thing about SEC bias is that you explain to me why a talent scout in the NFL has any SEC bias at all. He doesn't. He has zero bias to the SEC. He wants the best player because the NFL is about
Yep.
making money. And when it comes down to making money, they have determined over time based on speed, strength, talent, skill, coaching, the players from the SEC tend to do better. They're a better brand. They last longer. That's why more get recruited. Otherwise, they wouldn't recruit them. So when you're looking at, every year they're pulling players from the SEC more than any other conference. I mean, the SEC, I think produces more first round picks. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at the talent level, you don't become a first round pick for no reason. You just don't. Now, keep in mind that when you are putting that number of players in the NFL, those players play on teams in the SEC that SEC teams have to play against. So if you want to talk about strength of schedule, that's where the top players in the country come from. That's what we play week in, week out.
The only thing I'll say about SEC bias that I think is somewhat legitimate is everything that you just stated. I'm totally on board with. Is that before the season starts, any season, and there are rankings, there are projections made before anything's proven, I'm big into dismissing what's happened in the past and completely evaluating and judging what's on the field. So when we go into 2022, sure, I'll have my opinion, and my opinion is probably going to be that the Pac-12 is going to suck again. But I'll at least say, let's reserve all judgment until these teams step on the field and actually prove something.
I completely
and that's
agree.
the only thing that bothers me is that that there's a bias given by a lot of people and ratings and rankings given before they're earned.
And I completely agree. I think that you really kind of start to get a legitimate feel about week 4, maybe week 5. But one of the things that always seems to pan out is that if a team will consistently perform and you get to the end of the season and you've only lost one game, you're pretty much in no matter what conference you're in. Now, if your conference has scheduled one or two tougher opponents like a Notre Dame and you beat them soundly, then yes, you deserve the recognition that you should get for beating a Notre Dame. Teams should get some ranking qualification based off of their recruiting, but every single year I will pick the top 2, 3, or 4 teams and I will do top returning players because I think that's a great indicator as to how strong your team is going to be. So at Georgia, if you tell me next year Stetson Bennett's coming back, I'm going to lose my mind. I just don't want Stetson Bennett. I would prefer to have an 8-5 season with Brock Vandergrift than I have a 10-2 season-ending loss with Stetson Bennett. I just don't want that. But if I had to base it on which one of those guys is likely to perform better based on experience, I'd have to pick Stetson Bennett. If he leaves, I'd have to say Georgia does step down a notch until I see more from Brock Vandergrift. I think a lot of teams out there get too much credit at the beginning of the season, and by the time you're week 6 or 7, the whole deck just about has shuffled.
Yes. So I'm going to bring up a year that you don't want to hear, and I wouldn't do this otherwise, but I see it listed every day on my videos. So what do you have to say about 1980 and how much that matters that Georgia hasn't won a national championship? So there's this term thrown out all the time by college football fans. Elite. Who's elite? Well, obviously Alabama's elite. I don't think there's any question, unless we're only going to have one program in the club, then Ohio State's elite. And then you can have an argument whether we're talking all time, USC's elite. Are they elite right this second? No, they're not anywhere close. They're horrible. So then you've got all those sorts of variations, whether you're talking all time or kind of a mixture of the two or whatever. So where do you think Georgia stands in all that, and how important is it to win a national championship?
I think it's every team wants to win a national championship, but if I was basing my fanhood on just winning national championships, I wouldn't be a fan of Georgia. Nobody would be a fan of Clemson because they didn't win it last year. Nobody would be a fan of LSU this year because they've had such a bad season. Nobody would be a fan of Michigan because they haven't won a national championship in the past couple of years. Nobody would be a fan of Nebraska anymore because they haven't won a national championship in I don't know how long. So winning a national championship, while important, it's all something we all want. You have to come to the realization that just because your team doesn't win a national championship doesn't mean you shouldn't care about and love and enjoy your team. Now, if you want to have a conversation about who's elite, then let's have a conversation about what is your credentials for elite. Because here is what I would say is elite. First, I'm going to pick the very best team in college football history, Alabama. Right? I think Alabama is the greatest football team in history. They have more national titles than anybody else. They're consistently top ranked in recruiting. They consistently outcoach people. They consistently do what needs to be done to make themselves relevant. Now, that same team will tell you they don't want to play Georgia every other week. Now, if your biggest competition or the guy that you're trying to beat is telling you he doesn't want to play you back to back to back, that's an indication that you're probably elite. I'm sure that he would not want to play a LSU from last year over and over again. I'm sure he wouldn't want to play Clemson a couple of years ago over and over again. But if you asked him if he wanted to play Notre Dame, he'd be like, yeah, that's no problem. You guys want to play Florida? Yeah, that's no problem. You guys want to play Nebraska? Sure, line them up. How about Oregon? Yep, ready to go. But based off of what you've seen, where the way Justin Fields played at Ohio State, I wouldn't want him to play. I didn't want to play him. I would play him, but I didn't want to. Just like I don't want to play Alabama again. And I think that if you're trying to figure out who is elite and who's not elite, take a look at where your recruiting rankings lie. Take a look at college football playoff appearances, not just national championships, because they hand out one every year among 130-something teams. It's extremely hard to win. Otherwise, everybody'd have 10.
All-time NFL first-round draft picks. Ohio State 1, USC 2, Alabama 3, Notre Dame 4, Miami 5, Georgia's at 3rd, Michigan's at 8, Georgia's at 13. That's, of course, all-time, so you're going back to forever. All-time NFL draft picks. Those were first-round picks. Notre Dame 1, USC 2, Ohio State 3, Oklahoma 4, Michigan 5, Alabama 6. Georgia's 14. But then again, you can wait, okay, what's been more recent versus obviously that goes back to the beginning of the NFL draft.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I do like to point out is things that I consider elite is when you can consistently have, double-digit win seasons. Michigan does that. Ohio State does that. Alabama does that. Notre Dame does that. Oklahoma. Texas until recently did that. Georgia does that. Florida used to do it consistently. Auburn used to be pretty consistent. I think all of those teams certainly have capability of getting back to where they were. But I think if you had to put 5 teams on one hand, one for each finger, keep Georgia out of that. Keep Georgia out of that and justify your position if you can, because I bet you can. You're going to go Alabama. You can say Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia.
Are we talking about right this second or all time?
No, all time. All time. Now, you can't use Yale or Harvard either now.
Oh, if I'm going to go all time, I'm going to put Texas, Oklahoma, and USC in front of Georgia.
Okay.
And I'm going to put Nebraska and Penn State in front of Georgia.
Okay. Now, out of those teams, where are they at now?
Oh, right now, Georgia's an elite program. Georgia's third on my list right this second. Now, I'm not talking about the teams as they line up right now. I think Georgia's either the best team or the second best team in the country. I'm talking about a program. I think Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, and Ohio State are definitely elite. Oklahoma, I'd like to see a little bit more out of them in competing against the other top teams in the country. They seem to always get smashed.
Georgia in all-time wins is ranked number 15. Michigan's ranked number 1, and Ohio State is ranked number 2. Even if Georgia was to win the next 53 straight games, we still wouldn't have as many wins as Michigan. So I'm not trying to say that Georgia has more wins than Michigan. There's more to a football team than just wins. If you look at, consistently, what is your, how have you done over the years? What is your overall record for bowl games? What is your overall record against conference opponents, out of conference opponents? Not just, cupcakes. And every team plays cupcakes. But if you look at, the fact that Georgia's previous head coach averaged like 10 wins a season, the current coach we have is averaging almost 11. I think that says in and of itself that this is a football team that is going to consistently perform. And that's one of the things I look at is when you have your worst year, when you have your down year, how bad is your down year compared to your best up year? I think Georgia's pretty consistent. I think Ohio State's pretty consistent. Typically, Clemson's been pretty consistent since Dabo Swinney got there.